And good morning in the frozen tundra that is, or from the frozen tundra that is Texas. And if Andy, you want to warm up, you start with a little Magnum PI. Maybe that gets us 17 degrees here, local temperature. How are we looking down in Houston?
According to my watch, it's 24 with a wind chill of like 10 or something like that. But I'm inside, warm, talking to you.
Yeah, and no, it's funny. I was talking to my neighbor who I should really check on that guy because there was an EMS truck across from his house, but I think it was across from the neighbor. I should probably check on him. Anyway, we're talking about just like the PTSD though that we all have now after 2021, where the grid failed, and then in Austin, all the trees collapsed, all the power lines. It's like, we've survived more ice storms without losing power than with.
Yeah, I have to remind myself because I don't have PTSD on these kind of things. I don't assume every hurricane is going to be Harvey. I don't assume every winter storm is going to be Uri. So I just kind of go about my business. But I watch my neighbors, I watch friends, I watch people online absolutely losing their shit. We talked about me being in HEB last week, or last Friday. People losing their shit. And it turns out they're going to have a lot of extra food because everybody was out and about yesterday. And I assume when people start waking up and, the temperatures approach, 28, they'll be out again today because our roads are passable. But yeah, PTSD is a real thing. And I try to be mindful of that. I'm blessed not to suffer from it on these particular kind of events.
Yeah. And
having said that, if anybody would like to let me move to a place that has no natural disasters, I would be willing to do so.
It did make me, I kind of had this realization of, because we've talked pretty openly about wanting to move. Of course, now my child has decided to move here. For years we've been hoping she'd move here, and now she's coming, which means we're not leaving. But Austin, in all reality, is pretty safe from the natural. Whatever hurricane we get's a remnant. We don't often freeze. We don't get tornadoes here because of the geography. We get some straight line winds every now and again. We actually are in a pretty cherry spot right here for natural disasters. Unless you count.
I appreciate that. I don't know if it's changed. I do appreciate that not everybody understands how Texas works, though, because when I lived in Austin, there were giant river floods between San Antonio and Austin that were, devastating for that area, the mids. This is back in 2001, 2002. And Nissan Finance decided I didn't have to pay my car note for like 3 months. So I appreciated that because of all the suffering that was happening because of the floods. And it's cool. I will go to the neighborhood pool and let you know how it is.
They will not. They don't do that in Trump's America. That's a different.
That was you signed those papers, sir.
That was
you knew what you were getting into. Yeah. Let them crash.
And by the way, let them crash. I do want to talk a little bit about, it's a heavier subject, but we're talking ice. We might as well. We talked on the show about a little bit of we touch on politics, and to be frank, sometimes there are things that are so egregious that have to be mentioned by anybody that's talking. And, I'm always going to my default setting when there's any type of officer involved shooting is always going to be on the side of the officer. And part of that is my experience of having been raised by one and knowing what it's like to be afraid that your dad's not going to come home. Also, having been in shoot, don't shoot situations where split seconds make decisions. Nothing about what happened in Minnesota over the weekend qualifies anywhere near to being a justified shooting. And any attempt to gaslight us has just been, honestly, it's everybody's fears coming to life, Andy. It really is becoming 1984. My wife brought up the quote the other day about how when they start telling you what you've seen isn't what you've seen, that's when you know there's a problem. We have a right to bear arms in this country. And it's egregious, Andy, when the NRA is coming off on the side of not the government in this issue.
I think we need to stop. And I have a great deal of respect for legitimate law enforcement. I have a great deal of respect for the legitimate military. What is happening on the streets of Minnesota right now are neither one of those things. I don't think ICE, as it's currently constructed, can legitimately be called law enforcement anymore. They are operating as a Gestapo, and I understand people don't like being compared to Nazi Germany, but I don't know what else you call it when you are shooting an unarmed man because he was disarmed. The gun was not in his hands. It was not in his holster. Somewhere between 11 and 14 times, and then cheering about it. That's not law enforcement. That's not a deterrent. That's not de-escalating a situation, which is all the things that law enforcement officers are supposed to do. All the witness accounts that aren't coming from DHS indicate that Alex Preddy was helping a woman up who got shoved by a DHS or by an ICE officer. The ICE officer involved did not like that and decided to engage Preddy, took the gun out of his holster, and then proceeded to put him face down in the concrete, douse him with bear spray at a zero range, shoot him somewhere between 11 and 14 times.
Yeah.
For what no one really can seem to say. Even the president currently is starting to say, well, maybe this one wasn't clean. It's mind-boggling that we live in this country, and it really does, because I think both of us live in a world where we have a lot of privilege, and it's easy for us to say to some of our more left-leaning individual friends or acquaintances that, you're overreacting about some of this stuff. This isn't what's happening. And it's turning out to be, some of it is what they were saying was going to happen is happening.
Yeah. And well, yes. And, if you're talking about, well, you shouldn't have brought the gun to a riot. Well, first of all, it wasn't a riot. Second of all, we have a Second Amendment, and he apparently was doing everything by the book.
We have a Second Amendment, and Minnesota's an open carry state.
Yeah, and they did not find his gun until he was already face down on the ground and under arrest, essentially. Like, they found it in his waistband. If I'm being generous, what I am assuming is because of the lack of training and the lack of professionalism of these individuals, they heard the word gun, freaked out, and started popping the dude. It is the difference between professional trained police. And what's interesting is I talk to my dad about this stuff a lot, and he will tell you, whether rightly or wrongly, that there's always a pecking order of quality of law enforcement. And generally speaking, your really professionally well done trained officers go to big cities because they pay better, they have better benefits, there's everything else. And so everybody else sort of hires downstream from that. And I don't know. I mean, we've all heard the stories of them reducing the training of what ICE needs to be, reducing the qualifications. Isn't the training now like 47 days because Trump's the 47th president? I mean, and yet we're asking them to do things that they're frankly not trained to do. And bad things are happening. Plus, I don't know the mental makeup of these individuals in the first place, because these are probably, I'm assuming, tough guys that want to beat up on some brown people.
Well, I think that's the issue. I don't think I think were at one point, whatever your feelings are about ICE and their mission, there was legitimate, and I'm not talking about this year or in 2025, there were legitimate law enforcement officers and Border Patrol officers who worked as part of ICE. The recruiting push to meet the weird ass 3,000 people a month number that Stephen Miller has come up with has caused them to expand dramatically the scope, type, and profile of person they're willing to take in that role. And you have every weekend warrior, every January 6th insurrectionist, every criminal out on parole who can now be handed a gun and told, hey, go live out your worst instincts officially, and according to the vice president, with full immunity. I don't know what they expect to happen. This is exactly what's going to happen. And frankly, Conspiracy Andy thinks this is what some people in our government want to happen so they can pull the next lever.
Well, the next lever, of course, I mean, we all know where this is heading, right? This is heading with the ability to then declare martial law and the ability to start controlling people's movements through intimidation or whatever to help affect the outcomes of the midterms. There's a reason why these are, because even though these are happening in Democratic states, and just because you have a Democratic state, I'm sorry, a Republican state, for example, doesn't mean that Austin is any less liberal than Minnesota. Houston, frankly, probably not any less liberal than Minnesota. They're picking states where they want to affect election outcomes through, I would believe, through voter turnout. And I think the fact that the Trump administration has already said, we'll pull out if you offer up your voter registration rolls. Like,
oh yeah,
that's saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, and they're not subtle about it, so I don't know why anybody would be, shocked that that's the end goal, is to get data information that they can't get, and they're willing to kill citizens to get it. But yeah, Texas has, I think I read 200 times the amount of potential undocumented immigrants than Minnesota does. And ICE is absolutely operating here. I know that based on the industry I work in, there are pickups happening, but we don't have the paramilitary force that seems to be occupying Minnesota. We don't have Greg Bovino doing camera ops. We don't have the nonsense that seems to be going on with that. They're picking up people quietly, as quietly as they can here in Texas, as to not cause a ruckus or disrupt Greg Abbott's business, because Greg Abbott is a good soldier. The whole thing's sickening. And it's, I know it's not what this show is. I don't know how, if you're not talking about this today, if you're not thinking about this today, I don't know how you call yourself a citizen of this country, because, there's 40% of this country that approves of what our current government is doing. There's probably 40-ish% that don't. And there's another 20% that just seems to be oblivious to all of it. And I don't know how you live in that 20% anymore. I don't know how you manage to avoid everything that have you form any sort of opinion. And that's how we have the situation we have now.
Well, I will say this too. The mayor of Minneapolis and Governor Tim Walz, and Tim Walz is actually a politician I like. I voted for him for vice president, has culpability here. And I don't mean rhetorically, but there is a small sliver of them refusing to say enough's enough. And part of what I believe the problem to be is that ICE, in theory, is supposed to work in concert with local police departments. Minneapolis is a sanctuary city, and we can debate whether or not we think sanctuary cities should be a thing. I do not believe they should be allowed to be a thing. We had this thing in 1865 called the Civil War that said federal law outdoes everybody else. And when those laws are in conflict, federal law always supersedes, right? So, but this is, we are not lawyers. We're not going to have this discussion. It does seem like after the first Minneapolis citizen was killed, that you then start having Minnesota PD, Minneapolis PD help ICE in these situations, if anything, to create a buffer between the actual enforcement piece that ICE is doing and what local PDs in other cities do, which is creating crime zone areas and creating a separation between protesting and ICE. Minneapolis seems to have been the only city tonight to not abandon the whole defund the police thing and thought that was, they still think that's a really good idea, and it almost feels like they don't want to either be wrong or are okay with creating a potential message by keeping their citizenry not protected from ICE. If they were to tomorrow start saying, all right, tell us where you're going for these raids and we will be there to help set perimeters, you would see this violence immediately start to die down. It doesn't mean that I think it's their fault. It does mean at some point leadership means what's the most important goal here, and the goal should be safety of your citizens.
There you go.
That's all I got to say about that. I know that's controversial because people that are listening or just tuned in will think Jim just said it was the mayor of Minneapolis's fault. And the reality is, I just want there to be an adult in the room. We all see the problem. Let's not have any more shots get killed.
Yeah, and I think there's probably some blame to go there. I also think that there is a very specific mission that this group of ICE agents has to make this as bad as possible. So
right.
I'm not willing to give them any good faith that they are trying to coordinate with any local law enforcement and that they're not out picking fights regardless of who's supporting them or not supporting them.
No, I think there's a high likelihood that you're correct there. I just think you could potentially remove one of those variables, or at least make their intent more obvious by saying we're going to commit personnel to at least go where the protesters are to start creating some of these barriers. Because there is the possibility, like we said, that part of the downside of having these officers, although, it's funny, our whole theory about these guys being untrained and unprepared and whatever, both shooters have been more than 7-year veterans for ICE. So actually that theory of these guys all just being scared and unprepared and whatever probably holds very little water, because both of these guys were veterans. It's just, I don't see how ICE survives after this. I think you have to get rid of this organization and then reconstitute something else to perform the parts of this mission that are necessary.
Well, ICE does not have a long history in our country. I know we like to pretend that, everything existed forever, but ICE didn't exist in the 70s. It is a relatively new invention by our government. We used to have Border Patrol, and they did this crazy thing called hanging out at the border.
Yeah, right.
ICE evidently doesn't have such, crazy geographic restraints.
The simple solution to all of this is, if you get arrested and then it turns out you're an illegal alien, you get immediately deported. And I know that wasn't happening, right? Like all of these things and people being so over illegal immigrant, everything's a reaction to something. And there's no, everything's a pendulum and everything. And it was lax and it was relaxed. And a lot of Democrats now will pretend like they've been saying it all along, even though I can go back to the election and they really weren't saying that then. Everything is a reaction. And what we have to do is we have to get an adult in the room to say is enough. It seems to me that if you get arrested and you're illegal, you go home. If you're not getting arrested, I don't give a shit that you're here. That's at least my personal opinion.
Seems fair and logical.
It does. So one of the things that I was waiting to hear as we move back into sports, Carlos Beltran got into the Hall of Fame, which, kind of a bubble player in my opinion, but he got in. He deserved to be in. And to me, this means that any thought that Altuve would be held out of the Hall of Fame, because I think he's got much better numbers, as far as better than numbers than Carlos Beltran has, or at least is on track to have them. That seems to me that argument's gone, that you cannot, that they're not going to be holding 2017 against Carlos Beltran. Something that I thought was interesting coming out of a Bob Costas interview I watched that you and I don't think had heard at all, was that actually veteran players had gone to Beltran and asked him to stop the scheme, and he didn't stop the scheme. Which I found, again, kind of a thing that just, I'm surprised, was it Rich Eisen I was watching sort of let that lay there without following up. But what are your thoughts, though? Do you think that him getting in makes that argument for Altuve a little bit easier?
Well, I don't know that I agree that he's as borderline as you might think he is, or on the border or the bubble or whatever, because baseball players aren't compared to one another as a giant group. So his ticket in is that he's probably the best switch hitting baseball player that played Major League Baseball in history. That puts him in my mind. Somehow that didn't work for Lance Berkman, who never even got 5% of the vote and only lasted one vote, even though they have, comparable careers. But let's not talk about that. Or Lance Berkman.
Well, I think that's why I brought it up, though, because Berkman didn't get in, with, to your point, similar. But either way, he's
but Jose Altuve will get in. I do think there will be enough voters that have this. Well, he's not a first ballot guy, but I think he'll have to sweat it out through 2 or 3 years of being eligible, but he'll be in eventually. I think the argument that anybody in baseball who would make these decisions would be holding 2017 against Jose Altuve, is fan fantasy. And the fantasy of fan bases in Los Angeles and New York and a couple of other cities, Seattle for some reason, even though they might have, what would you have come in 4th place instead of 5th place that year? But it just belies the question. When Costas says stuff like that, when you have some of the other conversations that have been happening since Beltran's nomination was announced, or his acceptance was announced, it's starting to almost become a wink kind of conversation. Everybody in baseball knew that there were a whole lot of franchises doing what the Astros did, minus the trash cans, which was fully legal, by the way. Sign stealing, using electronics to do that. It's documented that both Boston and New York were fined for doing similar things with Apple Watches or smartwatches.
No, they weren't.
No, they really weren't.
And that's the end of the counter argument. No, they weren't. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's documented. If you want to talk about rumors, then you have to add in the Dodgers, the Rangers, and about 6 other teams. And everybody in baseball, like steroids, knew it was happening. But the difference in the Astros, and we talk about this all the time, and it's annoying. I guess it's going to come up every time one of them is eligible now for something, is that Mike Fiers came forward and blabbed. And then he has a right to do that, and he has a right to rat out his team and has a right to do all that. No other franchise had that issue. Any other franchise has that issue where a player goes public with a beat writer who has an axe to grind, because Evan was not a big fan of working for the Astros as a beat writer when he had to.
Yeah.
That made the difference.
The second part of that is that when asked, the Astros were honest.
And that's what I was getting to next. The next part is that Jim Crane made his players available in exchange for immunity. We're going to talk if you give us immunity, which is fantastic. The Boston ownership, who had the same kind of investigation happened, their ownership said, nope, you're not talking to a single one of our players. And look at the difference.
Yeah. Because the Dodgers, the Red Sox ownership saw how the Astros were punished, contrary to popular, and wait, if they had just would have said nothing, then we would have had some assistant GM fired, probably the guy they fired for being an asshole already, and been like, yeah, it was totally his fault too. Let him go.
Yeah, Taubman would have still been on the chopping block. I mean, slightly more significant than the video board operator who, was working independently somehow as a rogue agent in the Red Sox organization. So evil, in fact, they hired him back a year later. But that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
But on Beltran, I tend to be more memory oriented when we get to the Hall of Fame than I am numbers oriented. And Carlos Beltran being traded to the Astros in 2004 was one of my best baseball memories. What he did for that half a season and then in the playoffs were some of my best baseball memories up to that point. It really makes you remember how much baseball works against you and your heart sometimes, because 2004 was a great team. You had 4 Hall of Famers on that team. And if, regardless of what I personally think about Roger Clemens, if he's treated fairly, you have 5.
Sure.
5, and one of them being
had 6, because there's people make the argument that Andy Pettitte was one of the best left-handed starters. So, I mean, it's a better team than the 05 team.
Yes, 100%. Not as good as the 19 team. We won't talk about that. That's the heartbreak of being an Astros fan, is I don't think it's the in top 3 of teams that didn't win a World Series in Astros history. 2 of those are recent, but 98 probably was a better team than what 04 had. Anyway, you could at least make the argument. But the memories that Carlos Beltran's brief time, even the anger, that was the first time I ever felt that Astros fans really started growing up, the anger of him not re-signing after the trade, him going to the Mets. It was a great time in Houston. It was a great time in Houston baseball, even though we didn't win the big prize. And he was a big part of it. The fact that we came back and went farther in 2005 was a great kind of redemption story for the franchise and for the fans, because there was a lot of, we didn't even need Carlos Beltran, although we could have, won a World Series.
Him in the playoffs.
Yeah, I would have taken him back.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. And maybe, I even remember when he decided to come back in 2017, the reaction being decidedly mixed about if we even wanted him back or not.
But I also don't think this team, and not because of the ability to generate a sign stealing scheme, I don't think this team wins in 2017 without Carlos Beltran on that team at some point for the veteran leadership he provided at that point, because he provided virtually nothing on the field that year.
They even buried his glove, famously.
Real honest, but he enabled a team that was mostly guys that were in their second and third years in the league to be loose enough to have a funeral for a potential Hall of Famer's baseball glove because he's never going to see the field again.
Yeah.
You get that from having the right mix of guys. And I know we like to look at as fans these days about, well, if I put enough WAR on this spreadsheet, we're going to win enough games that we can get in the playoffs, and then everything's a crapshoot. That's, it's part of the plan. And I think the chemistry still has to be part of Dana Brown's job when you're building a clubhouse, when you're putting together the group that you're going to go to war with. Hate that term. Play the season through. Of guys that it's got to be the right mix of personalities. It's got to be the guys who are going to. Carlos Correa needed somebody like Carlos Beltran to show him how to be a superstar in Major League Baseball. And that's the value he brought to the 2017 team. I'm under no illusions that he would be going in as an Astro. He was with us for 4 months as a player, but the fact that we're talking about him shows kind of what an indelible mark he made on the franchise, even in that brief time. And so, congratulations to him and his family.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the very fact that
still the only player who suffered any punishment from the 2017 scandal.
Well, and that's the thing too. And I think people need to remember, like, how it's funny to me when people want to criticize AJ Hinch or all of that stuff. But when you are young, it is hard to speak up and it is hard to stop. But also, what is the incentive? If a veteran sits here and says correctly, hey man, there's 8 or 9 other teams that are going to be a little bit ahead of us because they're doing this thing. And if we do this thing, it'll be a level playing field. Then we would not have been super proud of our team for almost winning the World Series, but doing it clean. Like you either have teams that are trying to win, and all those teams that were trying to win were doing shit. And then you had teams that weren't, who didn't care because they were trying to lose. Pretty easy. One of the things, Andy, though, that the hyperbole machine is rolling is that Carlos Beltran is the first of at least 9 or 10 members of that 2017 Astros team that are going to the Hall of Fame.
Look, not true.
Realistically, there will be 2 more from that team. Realistically, Justin Verlander and Jose Altuve. I don't think any of the other guys are getting in for as much as we loved them.
Oh, Altuve will be in because of his hitting stats, but also because, as I was trying to point out earlier, and I got off on a tangent, he'll be compared to other second basemen. There are very few second basemen who have the offensive output that Jose Altuve had. If there's an outside chance on anybody else, and anybody else could blow up, Bregman could find his stroke and go back to 2018 and have 10 seasons in a row in Chicago being that guy again. I don't think it's going to happen, but it would take something dramatic like that. Springer's too old and had too much of a dip off his peak. He's a great guy, great player. This show's probably favorite player from that team, but he's not a Hall of Famer. Correa has a chance in my mind, and Correa has a chance if his production improves being back in Houston for the remainder of this contract. And there's some things that have to go right, but he's again going to be mostly compared to shortstops. And shortstops don't have a great history in Major League Baseball of being these great offensive players. You can name the best ones because there's only been a few of them.
It's true.
But it's going to take him stepping up performance, staying healthy, and some things have to fall in favor. There's an outside chance for him, but I think you're absolutely right. Verlander's in, first ballot. He won't suffer anything from 2017. It'll cause some more conversation, but I assume this is probably his last year. He hasn't even signed with anybody yet, I don't believe.
No.
Unless I missed something during Snowmageddon here. Let's say he plays this year that would be 2031. He'll be eligible. Altuve is going to play. He's going to chase 3,000 as long as he can 5 years after that. Verlander won't have the conversation around him about being part of that 2017 team that Altuve will have. Verlander, I think, gets in on his first try. Altuve, I think, gets in second or third time.
And then
I don't see anybody else happening. I mean, to your point.
There will be a real debate, too, when Verlander goes in, and obviously we've got time to discuss that, about what hat he has on. And I know it's mostly the Hall's decision, but you can make the argument for the Astros or the Tigers, and that argument's pretty even at this point. Clearly, the Tigers where he made his name, but 2 of his Cy Youngs, his 2 World Series championships, all with the Astros.
Well, they had to change the rule because of the grumpy old Nolan Ryan. Signed a contract with the Rangers saying, hey, when you get in the Hall, you have to wear our hat. And he's okay, because he wasn't mad at them at that point. Who knows what he would pick now? I know it wouldn't be Houston.
Maybe he'd be a California Angel.
He might pick his own minor league team.
I don't want to wear.
I never played for these guys. I'm picking the Alvin Yellow Jackets or whatever the hell they are.
Yeah, that would be. He's such a grumpy old man. One of the things also that came out of that Bob Costas interview that I thought mentioning, because again, it was now another national voice when it comes to baseball. We talked about Tim Kurkjian last time. Bob Costas now guaranteeing a work stoppage, and the owner's pulling for a full-on cap, and just this idea that the Dodgers. What I was happy about with the interview, because sometimes from baseball people, you get because they're all Yankee fans anyway, right? So you always get what Yankee fans say, which is the Pirates could spend like the Dodgers, but they just don't want to. And the Pirates have a problem. They could spend more, but no team can spend like LA. Even the Yankees, I don't think, can spend like Los Angeles can spend. And when you have that, there's almost you're almost incentivized by the Pirates to say, what's the point of trying to spend? I can't spend what they can spend. I might as well get as much money as I can based on luxury tax and sharing TV revenue. I do believe the game is broken, and I think it's a floor and a cap. I feel even more strongly about it's a necessity to have both those things after 2027.
Well, yeah, the cap is being talked about a lot, at least, among the media and fans. I don't think enough attention is being paid to the floor, which has to be part of it if you really want competitive balance, because even with a cap, there's no incentive for the Pirates or the Royals or the Marlins or the Washington Nationals to spend money. There just isn't. You put a floor in and you reasonably have to become more competitive just because you're paying better guys for more money. But I still, the closer this gets to 2027, I am starting to convince myself more and more, based on the interviews I'm seeing and things I'm reading, that Major League Baseball basically told the Dodgers to go ham on sign everybody for the most outrageous contracts you can put on paper, because we need a bad guy in this, and we need somebody to rally the fans against the players and put a salary cap in place, no matter what the damage is short term. Costas at this point won't even talk about broadcasting. I think he's made some point about only signing a 1-year contract because he didn't want to be jerked around for the 2027 season and have to cover ping pong somewhere.
Yeah.
Which is, making a comeback because of Marty Supreme, obviously. We're going to be talking about this so much. If you're watching this and you're a baseball fan, really enjoy 2026. Really sink your teeth in, go to all the games you can, because none of us know when in 27 there's going to be baseball. There'll be minor league games because smartly they've kept those guys out of any union or any ability to unionize, and they'll be pretty competitive. and you'll see teams in Round Rock and Sugarland and Corpus get really excited about their franchises winning things because that'll be the entertainment ticket.
Independent baseball will, of course, still be thriving, and I think that's where for Ballpark Nation, that's going to be a lot of where I think we're taking that is going to be the independent route.
Yeah. Hey, the Bryan Bombers would love to see you there.
Yeah.
I don't know what field they're playing in, but college baseball will also benefit. But as far as the major league product, if there's a season at all, I don't think it's before the All-Star break. I think it's that lengthy of lockout. And I think by the time you get to first part of July, wondering if you're playing, I don't know that you play.
Yeah.
And I think both sides are dug in. And ultimately, we know how this plays out because when billionaires and millionaires go to a fight, the billionaires will win.
Well, that is the thing. I mean, they could, and this is kind of what I see happening is, obviously whatever contracts are signed now are guaranteed. They're not going to, they will figure out a way to make numbers work to affect the contracts that are already in place. But I don't understand what's to stop Major League Baseball owners from saying, no, it's a cap. You can either decide to play or not. And what will end up happening is even if you lose some of your biggest stars, it's going to be ugly for them for maybe 2 or 3 years. But I think the league is actually in better position because of the way TV has changed than they were after the strike in 94. Like the strike in 94, I think came closer to killing the game than I think this will, because one, whether or not we're stupid or not, pedestrian fans understand salary caps. They know it exists in other sports and they like those other sports. So why wouldn't they like it here? But also TV networks will continue to prop up Major League Baseball because they need the content. So I think you might see a situation where, for a while, the Major League rosters will be made up of guys purely in AAA, but at some point we'll fall in love with those guys too. And then those will be our stars. And
I mean, with very few exceptions, everybody you watch now in Major League Baseball used to be in AAA. If you watch the Astros last year, most of the roster was in AAA and probably should have been. So, the players will come and go, and I don't mean to be as transient about them as they are, but that's the reality of it. They don't have the staying power because their importance to the game is predicated on their physical ability to play at a certain level. And if everybody's playing at a AAA level, you're not going to notice the difference.
That's the thing. It's not like football. I feel like you can tell in football when you're seeing, but you go to a single A game, it can be just as competitive and just as intriguing.
Well, it's always interesting to me, and I think one of the things I like about college football, or at least used to, was that you have, I'm just going to be the racist here, the white guy safety who probably isn't playing anywhere else, but he always has a nose for the football, so he's in every play, and we don't have any better options. So
you take Michael Taffy's name out of your mouth, buddy.
I have nothing to say about Michael Taffy because he owns A&M.
I don't think that dude's playing on Sundays. Maybe special teams.
But legitimately, you have those guys. When you get to the NFL, there are none of those guys. The worst guy on an NFL team was an All-American in college.
Sure.
Baseball has more room to have Casey Candell be a prime player on your roster.
Look at that.
There's your daily Casey Candell. I was trying to think of who's the worst player that just kept sticking around. Casey Candell. Probably had a 10-year career. I don't really know, but
he did. Yeah, I mean, he's getting that retirement check, and he's still in the system as a coach and manager. Hey, I wanted to finish up with a little pop culture because we did both get a chance to watch the documentary on Mel Brooks, and one of the things that struck me, because I'm one of those guys that's just madly in love with his wife, is having also watched the John Candy doc. Sad for a whole other different set of reasons, but I just think how brave Mel Brooks had to have been to get up every morning and go through a day without Anne Bancroft, because it's very clear just listening to him talk about his wife. He loves her as much as he did the first day he met her, and she's been gone 21 years now. And that just to me was the most heartbreaking thing.
Yeah. I don't know what you say about Mel Brooks. My wife came in at the wrong part of the second episode and decided that he was egotistical because he was talking about how wonderful he was, not realizing the tone of what he was talking about. It's like that you need to watch the other 3 hours of this before you
Where
make
he
that
pretty
judgment.
much hated himself. Yeah.
Yeah, the entire time. But I do think it's interesting that the love of the right woman, the love of the right partner can absolutely make you feel like you're the best thing in the world, despite your own proclivities to, for self-hate and self-loathing, which
Yeah.
Brooks clearly suffered from. Uh, you look at that doc, and if you watch it and you're a fan of comedy, if you're a fan of movies from the past 50 years, and you don't find yourself wondering if you own a copy of History of the World Part 1 or Men in Tights and, finding a way to stream it or download it, you will be, and you should, because they're all classics. Blazing Saddles is a classic. Young Frankenstein is a classic, and you don't have to feel horrible about, the can this film be made today question, because it probably couldn't. But so many things that he touched, so many things that he did were your show of shows led to Saturday Night Live, led to stand-up comedy as we understand it today, led to sketch comedy as we understand it today, led to sitcoms as we understand them today.
Yeah.
And he wasn't even a credited writer on that. He was just some guy Sid Caesar was paying to hang around.
Yeah. Well, it was like watching that's like watching Spielberg stories. And he's like, yeah, I was hanging out with George Lucas and we were bouncing ideas. I will say this, though, as someone who has dabbled in so many creative fields without a lot of tangible success, I'm pretty open about that. I don't think I'd keep doing it if I didn't have a wife that was actually, again, kind of similar to John Candy's wife. Like the scene in the doc when she was like, yeah, he's going to become a businessman. I was like, no, you should go be an actor. Mm-hmm. That definitely, I can't thank Jessica enough for that stuff. I will say two things that was interesting. Talking about his ego, the very fact that I didn't realize that he had produced The Elephant Man and produced all of these movies that he took his name off of. So that way people would take them seriously because he was always seen as this one guy. What is your favorite, my go-to underrated Mel Brooks film? And that's what we actually watched last night. Jessica had never seen it. To Be or Not to Be is by far, it's top 5 for me, Mel Brooks, and probably my favorite Mel Brooks movie that people don't know about. What is your kind of go-to Mel Brooks film that isn't necessarily on the lips of every pop culture fan?
12 Chairs is right up there, and I've only seen it a couple of times, but I don't think many people know of 12 Chairs, much less count it amongst their favorite movies or favorite Mel Brooks movies. In a way, I've already mentioned it, but History of the World Part 1 was a commercial flop, and not a lot of people have seen it. Up until recently, it wasn't on streaming. Finding a physical copy after VHS was really, really difficult because of some rights that were being held by, I think, Warner Brothers or something.
Well, now it's Disney, and it's because it's the same thing with Young Frankenstein. There's no there needs to be a 4K release, and there hasn't been one.
Yeah, and so now that you can watch that again, so many of the jokes that just resonate with me were from History of the World Part 1, and I think I probably saw it first because I think it was one of the ones that got rotated on HBO a lot when we were kids.
Exactly, definitely the same with the one I saw first, the first one I could quote because it was on all the time.
But the eunuch scene, we actually had a debate about it, what a eunuch was recently, and I went back to that. No, it doesn't mean that their penises are cut off. It just means that they're castrated and they can't get erections. And I know this because Gregory Hines could not get an erection. And people looked at me like I was insane because nobody knew what I was talking about.
Yes. Yeah. No. Yes. Yes.
Also, Madeline Kahn is a damn revelation. And if you don't appreciate Madeline Kahn in everything she's done, but especially in Young Frankenstein, in Blazing Saddles, in History of the World, I mean, she's a masterpiece.
She absolutely is. She's a revelation. And it's funny because for all of her Mel Brooks stuff, I mean, her best lines are in Clue. Like, he disappeared.
I mean, she had a
he wasn't
entire
very
career
good at
outside of
humorous.
Mel Brooks films, but that's just every time you see. I think they made a really good point, and I know I'm going off and off on a very long tangent here, or a very off tangent, but the way they did sex scenes in those movies, the way she did the sex scene in Young Frankenstein, there was nothing explicit, and even as probably an 8-year-old, when I saw that for the first time, maybe 10, you knew they were doing something that grown-ups do. You didn't know exactly what, but you knew something that was happening that made her sing, "Oh, mystery of life, I finally found you," in an operatic voice, was something you probably weren't supposed to be watching at 8 or 10 years old, and it made you laugh even harder.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And just watching like the relationship with him and Gene Wilder, and just what a dynamic pair that was. But I think probably the most endearing part of the doc was Dave Chappelle talking about he went up to Anne Bancroft and asked if she was trying to seduce him, thinking he was the cleverest guy ever. And she looked at him like he was an asshole. Like, oh yeah, I've never heard that before, But it also shows you too, just generosity of spirit, because when he made Men in Tights, he was already an icon. Dave Chappelle talked openly about just how much time he took with him to kind of take him under his wing, because he's a 19-year-old kid. And, I just think it's a different kind of sad, like I said, because having watched the John Candy documentary on the same day and just not making it just the Dan Aykroyd eulogy was just, you saw through the whole thing.
We talked about it when it came out, that the Bill Murray at the very beginning would break you.
Trying to figure out something bad to say, like you're wanting another Tombstone, and that's very Bill Murray, because he didn't want to cry and he was going to. But I can't imagine what it's like for Mel Brooks to, that's the downside of living to be 99 years old is everybody that you've
loved gone, Sid Caesar's gone, Anne Bancroft's gone.
Yeah. And
his first wife, who apparently he didn't care for that much, is gone.
Yeah. Well, we're getting Spaceballs 2. They did just release the title, which will be, as it should be,
The Search for More Money.
The Search for More Money. Because at first the working title was The Schwartz Awakens. I was a little disappointed, but now that has been confirmed with merch that it is called The Search for More Money. We're going to be searching for us being back on our show on Friday morning. Andy, I'll be dealing with Hotel Internet, because it will be the Austin Revolution Film Festival. So I do want to congratulate everybody that's nominated. And if you're curious and you're watching this and you are nominated, we'll be live streaming our awards show Tuesday night. I'll be right here. Andy, what are you going to be doing Tuesday night other than watching the Austin Revolution Film Festival?
I mean, there's a live stream of a film festival, so I'll probably watch that. That seems like as good a plan as any that I would come up with, so I'll probably do that.
All righty then. Well, everybody have a great day. Keep warm, keep dry.
Friday, I'm looking forward to not having this camera continually close up on my face every time I move my body.
It's trying to be.
I don't like this technology.
It's trying to be dramatic. It's directing for you.
I really hate this technology.
All right. Well, we are out.
Turn out the lights. The party's over. They say that all.